An old woman raises a giant wolf. What it does after her death will shock you. In the heart of the dense Siberian wilderness, where the winters were long and merciless, an old woman named Yelena lived alone in a small wooden cabin. She had spent decades in solitude, away from the bustling towns and cities, relying on the land and the creatures of the forest for companionship. One fateful winter night, as a blizzard howled through the trees, Yelena heard a faint whimpering outside her cabin. Wrapping herself in a thick fur coat, she stepped out into the bitter cold and followed the sound. Buried in the snow, shivering and barely alive, lay a small wolf pup. Its mother was nowhere to be seen, and the pup was too weak to move. Yelena knew that taking in a wild animal was dangerous, but she couldn't leave the helpless creature to die. She scooped it up and brought it inside, placing it near the warmth of her fireplace. The pup barely opened its eyes, but Yelena nursed it back to health with goat's milk and bits of meat from her dwindling supplies. Days turned into weeks, and the wolf, whom she named Mikhail, grew stronger. He was unlike any other wolf Yelena had ever seen, larger, more intelligent, and fiercely protective of his new home. His coat was as black as the midnight sky, and his eyes glowed with an eerie golden hue. As he grew, the villagers who occasionally visited warned Yelena to let him go. "Wolves belong to the wild," they said. "One day, he will turn on you." But Yelena laughed at their warnings. "Mikhail is my family," she would say. "He would never harm me." Years passed, and the bond between the old woman and the wolf became unbreakable. Mikhail hunted for her, bringing back fresh meat when the winter was harsh, and guarded her cabin fiercely against intruders, both animal and human. No one dared come too close, for tales of the giant black wolf spread far and wide. Then, one fateful night, Yelena, now frail and weak, sat by the fire, her hands trembling as she stroked Mikhail's thick fur. She knew her time was near. Looking into his glowing eyes, she whispered, "You've been my greatest companion. Promise me, when I am gone, you will not forget me." Mikhail let out a low, sorrowful whimper, as if he understood. That night, Yelena passed away peacefully in her sleep. The morning sun rose over the frozen land, but inside the cabin, Mikhail lay curled up beside her lifeless body, unmoving, silent. Days passed, and the villagers noticed that Yelena had not come to town. When a small group of brave men ventured to her cabin, they found something that made their blood run cold. Mikhail sat at the doorway, his golden eyes burning with a fury they had never seen before. Around the cabin, in the snow, were the remains of animals, rabbits, deer, even a large bear, all offerings that Mikhail had brought to his beloved mistress, refusing to accept that she was gone. When the men tried to step inside, Mikhail let out a deafening howl that sent shivers down their spines. He would not let them touch her. He would not let anyone disturb her rest. For weeks, Mikhail remained at her side, guarding her even in death. No one dared approach. The howls that echoed through the forest were filled with such sorrow that even the most hardened hunters felt a pang of grief. Then, one night, as the snow fell softly over the cabin, Mikhail let out one final, heart-wrenching howl before disappearing into the wilderness. Some say he ran deep into the mountains, never to be seen again. Others claim they still hear his mournful cries echoing through the trees on cold winter nights. But one thing was certain, Mikhail had kept his promise. He had never forgotten her. Years passed, and Yelena's cabin remained untouched, a forgotten relic of time swallowed by the forest. The villagers never dared to tear it down, for fear of what might return if they disturbed its sacred ground. Stories of the giant black wolf, Mikhail, spread far beyond the village, turning into legend. Some claimed he had become a spirit, forever watching over the land. Others believed he had died of heartbreak. Then, one bitter winter evening, a group of hunters ventured deep into the woods, searching for game. The forest was unusually silent, as if nature itself was holding its breath. As they moved cautiously through the thick snow, a chill ran down their spines, not from the cold, but from the overwhelming sensation that they were being watched. One of the hunters, Ivan, the eldest among them, suddenly stopped and pointed to the ground. "Look," he whispered. Huge paw prints, far larger than any wolf they had ever seen, were imprinted in the snow, circling the area. They were fresh. The hunters exchanged nervous glances. No wolf should be this large, and yet the prints were unmistakable. "We shouldn't be here," one of them muttered. Ignoring the warning, the youngest hunter, Pavel, laughed. "It's just an old wives' tale. Wolves don't live forever." He raised his rifle, ready to move forward. Before anyone could react, a deep, guttural growl echoed through the trees. The air grew thick with an invisible weight, pressing against their chests. The hunters turned, their breath freezing in terror. Emerging from the shadows, Mikhail stood at the edge of the clearing. But he was no longer just a wolf, he was something more. His fur had darkened into an inky black, blending with the night itself. His eyes, once golden, now glowed with an unnatural light. He was larger than any wolf in history, his presence exuding an ancient, otherworldly power. Pavel scoffed and raised his rifle. Before he could pull the trigger, Mikhail moved. In a blur of speed unnatural for any beast, he closed the distance between them. But he did not attack. Instead, he let out a deep, echoing howl, a sound filled with sorrow and warning. The ground beneath them seemed to tremble. Ivan, wise beyond his years, dropped his weapon and knelt. "He's not hunting us," he murmured. "He's protecting something." The realization struck them all at once. Mikhail wasn't just a wolf anymore.
He was a guardian.
Without another word, the hunters retreated, their hearts pounding. As they fled, they swore they heard a whispering wind behind them, almost like a voice, soft and ancient. "She is not alone." From that day forward, no one dared trespass near Yelena's cabin. And on the coldest of nights, when the moon hung high, villagers claimed to see the silhouette of a giant black wolf standing atop the ridge, watching, waiting, guarding the only soul he had ever loved. The legend of Mikhail, the guardian wolf, became sacred in the village. No one dared to go near Yelena's cabin, and those who spoke of disturbing the land were met with stern warnings from the elders. But as generations passed, the fear turned into curiosity, and curiosity, as it always does, led to recklessness. One stormy night, a group of young men, emboldened by drink and the foolish courage of youth, decided to challenge the legend. Among them was Victor, a skeptical and arrogant hunter who believed the tale was nothing more than a bedtime story for cowards. "We are men, not children," he scoffed, slamming his cup on the wooden tavern table. "It's just an old wolf that died long ago. I say we prove it." His friends hesitated, but the fear of being called cowards outweighed their common sense. And so, armed with torches and rifles, they made their way toward the forbidden land. The closer they got to Yelena's cabin, the quieter the forest became. The wind had died, the animals had gone still, and even the trees seemed to hold their breath. It was as if nature itself was warning them to turn back. When they reached the cabin, they found it untouched by time. Snow had piled against its wooden walls, but the structure remained sturdy, defiant against the years. Victor, eager to prove his point, kicked open the door. Inside, the cabin was eerily preserved. The firewood lay neatly stacked. Yelena's rocking chair sat facing the cold fireplace, and in the center of the room, her old bed remained undisturbed. But there was something else, something chilling. The floor was covered in massive paw prints, as if something had been pacing back and forth for years. And at the foot of the bed, resting on the wooden floor, was a massive black fur. Victor laughed.
"See?
Just an old wolfskin. This is what people feared." He bent down and grabbed the fur, lifting it triumphantly. But the moment he did, the air shifted. The temperature dropped so suddenly that frost formed on their clothes. The cabin door slammed shut behind them, and a deep, menacing growl rumbled through the walls. The men turned, their breath visible in the freezing air. And then, from the shadows, golden eyes flickered open. Mikhail was there. He did not lunge. He did not snarl. He simply rose from the darkness, his massive form filling the cabin with an unnatural presence. His fur, no longer just black, seemed to absorb the light, making him a living void. His eyes, once warm and golden, now burned like fire. Victor dropped the fur, his arrogance melting into terror. Then Mikhail moved. The walls of the cabin shook as he let out a howl so powerful it rattled the men's very souls. Shadows danced unnaturally around them, stretching and twisting. The cabin, the woods, the very air itself seemed to come alive. And then, darkness. The villagers awoke the next morning to find the young men stumbling back into town, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. They spoke no words of what they had seen. They never did. Victor was never the same. He left the village that very night, disappearing into the unknown, forever haunted by the golden eyes that had burned into his soul. As for Yelena's cabin, no one ever went near it again. And on stormy nights, when the wind howled through the trees, villagers swore they could hear a deep, mournful growl echoing through the mountains. Mikhail was still watching, still waiting, still guarding. The legend of Mikhail spread far beyond the village, reaching the ears of scholars, mystics, and treasure hunters alike. Most dismissed it as a ghost story meant to scare children, but a few believed there was something more, something unnatural guarding the old woman's grave. Among those intrigued by the tale was a man named Dmitri Sokolov, a historian obsessed with uncovering the truth behind ancient legends. He had spent years studying myths about guardian spirits, curses, and supernatural beings, and when he heard whispers of the Black Wolf of Siberia, he knew he had to see it for himself. With a small team of researchers and explorers, Dmitri set out toward the forgotten village. The journey was treacherous, endless forests, bone-chilling cold, and eerie silence that seemed to follow them wherever they went. By the time they reached the village, the sun was already setting, casting long shadows over the frozen land. The villagers, old and wary, warned them not to go near the cabin. "It is not just a wolf," one elder muttered, gripping Dmitri's wrist with bony fingers. "It is something beyond this world." Dmitri, of course, dismissed the warnings. He had heard such superstitions before. "Every legend has a source," he said, "and I intend to find it." That night, under the pale glow of the moon, Dmitri and his team ventured into the woods. The snow crunched beneath their boots, and the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the ghostly echoes of a long-forgotten howl. Then they saw it, the cabin, standing untouched by time, its wooden frame still sturdy despite the years. The air around it was unnaturally still, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Dmitri raised a lantern, its flickering light barely penetrating the thick darkness. He stepped forward, pushing the creaking door open. The inside was exactly as the villagers had described, dusty, preserved, yet unsettlingly alive. The massive paw prints remained on the floor, circling the bed where Yelena had once slept. But what caught Dmitri's attention was the old wooden chest in the corner of the room. Unlike everything else, it looked untouched by dust and time, as if someone or something had been protecting it. He knelt, brushing away the thin layer of frost. The chest was locked, but age had weakened it. With a swift strike of his knife, the lock snapped open. His hands trembled as he lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in delicate cloth, was an old book. Its leather cover was worn, the edges frayed, but the inscriptions on its surface glowed faintly under the lantern's light. Dmitri carefully turned the pages, his heart pounding. The writings were not in Russian, nor in any language he had ever seen. Strange symbols, ancient and powerful, filled the parchment, accompanied by sketches of a black wolf with golden eyes. The last page, however, sent a chill down his spine. It was a drawing of Yelena, an old woman holding a wolf pup in her arms. But the pup's eyes were not the innocent golden hue of a normal wolf. They were fiery, otherworldly. Beneath the drawing, one word was etched in deep, jagged letters. Cursed. A sudden gust of wind blew through the cabin, extinguishing the lantern. The room plunged into darkness. And then the growl. Low, deep, and filled with a fury that seemed to shake the very walls. Dmitri froze. His team gasped, their flashlights starting wildly. The shadows at the far end of the room twisted, stretching unnaturally, as two glowing eyes emerged from the darkness. Mikhail had returned, but he was no longer just a wolf. His form was larger than any natural beast, his fur blending seamlessly into the darkness itself, as if he were a part of the night. The air around him crackled with an unseen force, and the moment he stepped forward, the cabin groaned, as if the very earth feared his presence. One of Dmitri's companions, Sergei, raised his rifle. "Stay back," he shouted. Before he could fire, Mikhail moved. In a blur of motion, the rifle was knocked from Sergei's hands. The man stumbled backward, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But Mikhail did not attack. Instead, he turned his gaze toward Dmitri, locking eyes with him in an unspoken challenge. Dmitri understood. This was not just a wolf. This was something beyond mortal comprehension. A guardian, yes, but also something more. A force that had lived beyond its natural years, tied to this place, bound by an oath stronger than death itself. Dmitri slowly raised his hands. "We mean no harm," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We only seek knowledge." Mikhail let out a soft growl, his massive form shifting. Then, to Dmitri's astonishment, the wolf stepped back. He turned toward the open doorway, his eyes glancing once more at the book in Dmitri's hands. And then he disappeared into the night. Dmitri and his team did not sleep that night. They sat in silence, the weight of what they had witnessed pressing down on them. When morning came, they left the cabin, the book clutched tightly in Dmitri's hands. Back in the village, the elders awaited them. When they saw the book, their expressions turned grave. "You should not have taken that," one of them whispered. Dmitri frowned.
Why?
"What does it mean?" The elder hesitated before speaking. Mikhail was no ordinary wolf. He was chosen, bound to a duty he did not ask for. That book holds the secret to his existence and the key to his freedom. Dmitri's mind raced. Freedom? Had Mikhail been cursed to roam the earth forever, bound to protect a mistress who had long since passed? Before he could ask more, a bone-chilling howl echoed from the mountains. Mikhail was watching, and he was waiting for someone to finally break the curse. Dmitri sat by the village fire, the old book resting on his lap, its strange symbols flickering under the dim light. The elders whispered among themselves, their wrinkled faces filled with worry. They knew something that he did not, something ancient and terrifying. "You have awakened something that should have remained undisturbed," the oldest among them, Babushka Lena, finally spoke. Her voice was brittle, but the weight of her words pressed heavy on Dmitri's chest. "I didn't awaken anything," Dmitri argued. "I simply found a book." The villagers murmured in hushed tones. One of them, a middle-aged man with deep scars across his face, stepped forward. "You do not understand," he said, his voice rough as though it had been scraped raw by years of screaming in fear. "That book is not just a story. It is a contract, a curse, a truth long buried by time." Dmitri's grip on the book tightened. He had spent his life chasing legends, deciphering myths, uncovering the forgotten past. And now, sitting in the presence of those who had lived under the shadow of the Black Wolf's curse, he knew this was his greatest discovery yet. "What does the book say?" he demanded. Babushka Lena took a deep breath, her milky eyes reflecting the fire's glow. "The book is written in the language of the old gods, the ones who walked this land before men built their homes. It speaks of a pact between a woman and the spirit of the wilderness. Yelena was no ordinary woman. She was a seer, a healer, one who could speak to forces beyond our understanding. When she found Mikhail as a pup, she did not merely raise him. She bound his soul to hers." Dmitri's heart pounded. "Bound his soul." "Yes," the old woman whispered. "Mikhail was never meant to be just a wolf. He was something else, something that should never have been tamed. And when Yelena died, the bond did not break. He was cursed to remain, to guard her resting place until the end of time." Dmitri's mind reeled. But why? Why would she do that? The elder man with the scars spoke again, his voice grave. Because she feared what he would become if left to his true nature. You see, Mikhail is not just a guardian. He is the last of an ancient breed, creatures born from shadow and moonlight, touched by the gods themselves. They were protectors once, but as the world changed, they became something else. Forgotten, abandoned, left to wander between life and death. A gust of wind howled through the village, making the flames flicker wildly. In the distance, from the mountains beyond the forest, a deep, haunting howl echoed through the night. It was a sound that carried sorrow, anger, and something else, something primal and endless. Dmitri felt a shiver crawl up his spine. Then how do we free him? Silence fell over the villagers. No one dared to speak. Finally, Babushka Lena's voice trembled as she uttered the words, "To break the curse, one must return to where it began." Dmitri knew what that meant. He had to go back. The journey back. The next morning, Dmitri set out with only his lantern, a rifle for protection, and the cursed book strapped tightly to his chest. The villagers refused to follow, warning him that no one who entered the wolf's domain twice had ever returned sane. But Dmitri had no choice. As he stepped into the forest, the trees seemed to close in around him. The air grew heavier, thicker, as if the very land was trying to push him back. Shadows danced unnaturally along the snow-covered ground, twisting and shifting as he walked. And then he saw it. The cabin stood exactly as he had left it, but something was different. The air around it was electric, charged with an invisible energy that prickled against his skin. The door was slightly ajar, as though expecting him. He stepped inside. The moment he crossed the threshold, the lantern flickered violently. The air grew cold, and an overwhelming presence filled the room. Then, from the darkness, golden eyes opened. Mikhail. The black wolf stood at the far end of the cabin, his massive form blending into the shadows like a living nightmare. He was waiting. Dmitri's breath came in short gasps, but he did not run. He could not. He held up the book with trembling hands. "I know the truth now," he said. "I know why you're here." Mikhail did not move. He only watched. Dmitri swallowed. "You are trapped, bound by an oath you never chose. But there must be a way to set you free." The wolf's ears twitched. A low, guttural sound rumbled from deep within his chest. Not a growl, not a snarl, but something ancient, something beyond words. Dmitri slowly opened the book to its final page. The strange symbols glowed faintly, pulsating like a heartbeat. He traced his fingers over the jagged letters beneath Yelena's drawing. To break the bond, one must offer what was given. Dmitri's mind raced. What had Yelena given? A sudden gust of wind blasted through the cabin, extinguishing the lantern. Darkness swallowed the room whole, and in that black void, Mikhail moved.
A
deep voice, not human, not animal, but something in between, whispered in Dmitri's mind. Life was given. Life must be taken. Dmitri's blood ran cold. To free Mikhail, a life had to be sacrificed. But whose? The realization struck him like lightning. It wasn't just any life. It had to be his. The book, the warnings, the fear, it all led to this moment. Mikhail had been bound by Yelena's love, her sacrifice. To release him, another must willingly take his place. Dmitri felt his pulse pounding in his ears. Was he ready to give his life for a creature he barely knew? For a legend? For a cursed soul? He took a deep breath. And then he made his choice. Dmitri stood frozen in the darkness, his breath shallow, his mind racing. The words echoed in his head. Life was given. Life must be taken. He knew what it meant, knew what the book was asking of him. But was he truly willing? Mikhail, the black wolf, remained still, his golden eyes burning in the darkness like twin embers. The energy in the cabin thickened, pressing against Dmitri's chest like an invisible weight. If he did not make a choice soon, the forest would take one for him. Dmitri licked his dry lips. "If I give my life," he whispered, Will you finally be free? The wolf did not answer, but the air around them shifted, humming with an unseen force. Dmitri took that as his answer. He glanced down at the book, its pages still pulsating with that eerie glow. The final passage stared back at him, its meaning now terrifyingly clear. Blood calls to blood. One must fall for another to rise. A sacrifice. A trade. One's soul for another. Dmitri's hands trembled. He had spent his life chasing myths, unearthing legends. But he had never imagined he would become a part of one. He had no family, no one waiting for him. His entire existence had been dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge. Was this his purpose? He exhaled slowly and pulled a small hunting knife from his belt. The steel gleamed under the faint glow of the book. "If this is the price," he said, voice steady, "then I will pay it." The moment he pressed the blade against his palm, the cabin shuddered. The walls groaned, the wooden floor creaked, and a gust of freezing wind howled through the open door. The darkness deepened, twisting and curling around them like living shadows. Mikhail took a step forward, his massive paws silent against the wooden floor. His golden eyes softened, not with hunger, not with malice, but with something almost sorrowful. As Dmitri made the first shallow cut along his palm, the wolf raised his head and let out a low, mournful howl. The sound vibrated through the very fabric of reality, sending a chill down Dmitri's spine. And then something changed. A presence filled the room. It was warm, gentle, familiar. Dmitri's breath hitched as the air shimmered before him, and a translucent figure materialized beside the wolf. A woman, old, frail, yet radiating a strength beyond human comprehension. Her silver hair floated as if caught in an unseen breeze, her kind eyes filled with an emotion Dmitri could not name. Yelena. The moment her spirit appeared, Mikhail lowered his massive head, his ears folding back in reverence. Dmitri took a shaky step back. He had not expected this. Yelena turned her gaze to him, her lips curling into a soft, knowing smile. "You do not need to die, child," her voice whispered through his mind. Dmitri's eyes widened. "But the book. The book speaks of sacrifice, yes. But sacrifice is not always death." She stepped closer, raising a ghostly hand toward him. Dmitri could feel warmth emanating from her, even though she was not truly there. "The sacrifice is your life, but not in the way you think." Dmitri frowned. "Then, what must I do?" Yelena's gaze flickered toward Mikhail. The great wolf stood still, waiting, watching. "Take his place." Dmitri's blood ran cold. "You mean become the guardian?" His voice barely rose above a whisper. Yelena nodded. "His soul has been trapped here for far too long. He was never meant to linger between life and death. But you, child, you have no chains. You are free to choose." Dmitri's mind swirled. Become the guardian? Stay here, bound to the forest, to the cabin, to the legend? It was a fate he had never considered. But then he looked at Mikhail, the creature who had suffered centuries of loneliness, of duty forced upon him. Dmitri's heart pounded. His entire life had been spent chasing history, uncovering legends. But now, he stood on the edge of becoming one himself. He looked at Mikhail, the great black wolf who had been trapped for centuries, the beast who had never been allowed to rest. His golden eyes burned with an emotion Dmitri could not name. Hope? Relief? A plea for release? Yelena's spirit watched him patiently. "You do not have to do this," her voice whispered through his mind. "But if you choose to, the burden will be yours. You will become what he was, the guardian of the forgotten." Dmitri swallowed hard. "And if I refuse?" Yelena's expression did not change. "Then the curse remains. The balance is undisturbed. He stays here, bound to this place forever." Mikhail let out a low, rumbling growl, not of anger, but of understanding. It was not a demand. It was a choice. Dmitri clenched his fists. He had always wanted to be remembered, to leave a legacy. But this was something else entirely. To take Mikhail's place meant giving up everything. No more cities. No more human connection. No more exploration. He would exist in the shadows, unseen, unheard, bound to this land until another came to take his place. But to refuse meant condemning Mikhail to another eternity of solitude. Dmitri closed his eyes. He had spent years searching for truth. And now, standing at the edge of it, he knew some knowledge was meant to be lived, not written in books. He inhaled sharply. I accept. The moment the words left his lips, the cabin trembled. The book in his hands burned with blinding light, its pages twisting and dissolving into golden embers that floated into the air. The symbols carved into the wood of the cabin glowed, ancient power awakening after centuries of silence. Mikhail stepped forward. The great wolf's form shimmered, his massive body trembling as the weight of his curse began to lift. His golden eyes locked onto Dmitri's one last time, grateful, sorrowful, and free. Then, in a burst of silver light, Mikhail vanished. A gust of wind roared through the cabin, swirling around Dmitri like a living force. The weight of 1,000 years settled upon him, seeping into his bones, his soul, his very essence. His vision blurred, his body felt weightless, and then, silence. When he opened his eyes, the world had changed. The air smelled richer, filled with scents he had never noticed before. The trees whispered secrets he could now understand. The wind carried messages he had never heard. His body felt stronger, his senses sharper, his soul bound to something far greater than himself. He was no longer Dmitri Sokolov. He was the guardian. And deep in the forest, on stormy nights, when the wind howled through the trees, travelers swore they could see golden eyes watching from the darkness. The legend lived on. Dmitri stood in the center of the cabin, his body trembling as an overwhelming force coursed through his veins. He could feel it, the pulse of the forest, the shifting of the earth beneath him, the heartbeat of something ancient that now resided within him. His breath came in slow, measured gasps. His vision had changed, colors were more vibrant, the darkness more alive. The whispers of the wind carried meaning he could now understand. The rustling of leaves spoke in hushed tones. He was no longer just a man. He was something else. Something more. The moment he took Mikhail's place, the curse had rewritten itself, binding him to this land as its eternal protector. But unlike Mikhail, who had been forced into this role, Dmitri had chosen it. And that choice gave him power. The door to the cabin swung open, revealing the vast, moonlit wilderness beyond. The air shimmered with unseen energy, the very fabric of the land acknowledging its new guardian. Dmitri took a hesitant step forward. The snow beneath his boots did not crunch. It accepted him, as though he had always belonged to it. A strange sense of unity filled him, a connection to something greater than himself. Then, from the distant mountains, a howl pierced the night. But this time, it was not one of sorrow. It was a call, a summoning. Dmitri's body reacted before his mind could comprehend. His limbs moved with effortless grace, his breath steady, his senses attuned to every shift in the wind. He ran not as a man, but as something in between, something caught between the world of men and the realm of beasts. And as he moved through the trees, he felt it, other presences awakening. Shadows stirred, eyes blinked open in the dark. For centuries, the black wolf of the forgotten forest had been the sole guardian of this land. But with his release, the balance had shifted. The hidden creatures of the old world, the spirits, the watchers, the forgotten ones, sensed the change. Some welcomed it. Others did not. Dmitri skidded to a halt at the edge of a frozen river, his breath misting in the icy air. The howling had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. The trees stood unnaturally still, their branches frozen midsway. He was being watched. Slowly he turned. Golden eyes, many golden eyes, blinked open in the darkness. Not just one. Dozens. They emerged from the shadows. Massive wolves, larger than any natural beast, their forms blending into the night like living phantoms. Some were black as the void, others shimmered with silver fur that caught the moonlight in ghostly patterns. These were not ordinary wolves. These were the forgotten ones. The last remnants of an ancient order that had once roamed this land, long before men had built their villages, long before steel and fire had driven them into the unseen corners of the world. One among them stepped forward. Its fur was a deep, inky black, yet its eyes burned a pale blue, cold, calculating. Its presence carried weight, an authority that even Dmitri, newly reborn as the Guardian, could not ignore. The wolf's voice did not come from its mouth, but from the space around it, as if the very air carried its words. You wear the mark of the Guardian, but you are not one of us. Dmitri's muscles tensed. He had not expected this. He had assumed the curse made him the new protector of the land, but now, standing before these creatures, he realized he was an intruder, a pretender. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. I took the place of Mikhail, he said firmly. I accepted the burden willingly. The black wolf studied him for a long moment, then let out a low, guttural sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a laugh. Willingly, it mused. Then you are a fool. The others stirred, their golden eyes glinting with unreadable emotions, curiosity, skepticism, perhaps even hostility. Dmitri clenched his fists. If I am a fool, then so be it. But I will not abandon this land. It is my duty now. The black wolf's blue eyes narrowed. Then, without warning, it lunged. Dmitri barely had time to react before the massive creature was upon him, its weight slamming into his chest like a hammer. He crashed onto the ice, the impact shattering the frozen surface beneath him. Freezing water swallowed him whole, dragging him into the abyss below. Darkness. Silence. The cold bit into his skin, stealing the air from his lungs. His vision blurred, his limbs numbed. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness took him was the pale blue glow of the black wolf's eyes staring down from above. Then nothing. Cold. Suffocating. Endless. Dmitri's consciousness drifted in the freezing depths. The river's icy grip threatened to pull him into the abyss, his limbs growing heavier with each second. The last thing he remembered was the blue-eyed black wolf lunging at him, testing him. Was this how it ended? Had he given himself to the curse only to be swallowed by it?
No.
A new force surged through his body, primal, powerful, unrelenting. It was not just his own will. It was something deeper, something ancient. He had become the Guardian, and the land itself would not let him fall so easily. With a sudden burst of strength, Dmitri kicked upward, his muscles igniting with unnatural energy. His hand found the jagged edge of the broken ice, and with one final desperate pull, he tore himself free from the river's grasp. He gasped as he emerged, collapsing onto the snow-covered ground, his body trembling from the shock of the cold. Steam rose from his skin, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The wolves stood in a silent circle around him, watching, waiting. The black wolf with the piercing blue eyes stepped forward. You did not drown. The words echoed in Dmitri's mind, more a thought than a spoken voice. You fought. You rose. Perhaps you are not so unworthy after all. Dmitri forced himself onto his knees, his body still shivering from the near-death experience. He met the wolf's gaze, refusing to show weakness. You tried to kill me. The black wolf let out a low, rumbling sound that might have been laughter. We do not accept guardians who cannot endure death. Dmitri's hands curled into fists. He understood now, this was a test. A trial. The Forgotten Ones, the last of the ancient wolves, did not recognize him as their leader simply because he had taken Mikhail's place. He had to prove himself. He had to survive. The other wolves began moving now, pacing in slow, deliberate circles around him. Their eyes glowed in the darkness, each pair watching his every move. You took the burden, the black wolf continued. But burdens must be earned. The spirits of this land do not bow to the untested. We will see if you are worthy to stand among us. Dmitri's breath steadied. And if I fail? The black wolf's blue eyes gleamed. Then you will die. Without warning, the first wolf lunged. Dmitri barely dodged in time, rolling across the icy ground as massive jaws snapped shut where his throat had been moments before. Another wolf charged, forcing him to dive to the side. They were not simply attacking, they were pushing him, forcing him to move, testing his reflexes, his instincts. He had no weapons, no armor, just his body and the strange, growing energy coursing through his veins. Then, something inside him shifted. His senses sharpened. Time seemed to slow. He could hear the wolves breathing, sense the shift in their weight before they struck. His body moved before his mind even registered the attacks, dodging, twisting, evading. It was as if the land itself was guiding him. A silver-furred wolf leaped at him. Instead of dodging, Dmitri moved forward, meeting it head-on. He twisted at the last second, using the wolf's momentum to send it crashing into the snow. The others hesitated for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Dmitri stood, his chest heaving, his muscles burning. He was no longer just fighting for survival, he was fighting to claim his place. The black wolf watched unmoving. Dmitri met its gaze and, for the first time, bared his teeth. Not in fear, not in anger, in challenge. The other wolves stilled. A heavy silence fell over the frozen clearing. Then, slowly, the black wolf stepped forward, its massive form towering over Dmitri. It studied him for a long moment before lowering its head. A gesture of acknowledgement, of acceptance. The other wolves followed suit, one by one bowing their heads in submission. Dmitri stood taller, the weight of the moment sinking in. He had passed the trial. He had been tested by the Forgotten Ones and had emerged victorious. He was no longer just a man. He was their leader, their guardian. And deep in the wilderness, where the trees whispered secrets older than time, the legend of the Black Wolf was reborn. The night was eerily silent as Dmitri stood among the Forgotten Ones, his breath misting in the freezing air. The ancient wolves had accepted him, not as an outsider, not as a mere mortal who stumbled into their world, but as their guardian. Yet, something inside him knew this was only the beginning. The black wolf with the piercing blue eyes stepped forward once more, its massive form casting a long shadow across the snow. You have survived the trial, but survival is not enough. Dmitri squared his shoulders. Then what more must I prove? The wolf's eyes gleamed under the moonlight. You must take the oath of the blood moon. A hush fell over the pack. The very air seemed to thicken with an unseen force. Dmitri's fingers curled into fists. He had accepted the role of guardian, faced death, and fought to earn his place. But this was something different. Something binding. The blood moon oath is older than time, the wolf continued. It was first spoken when the balance between men and beasts was still pure. It is not just words.
It is a pact.
A binding of soul and spirit. If you take this oath, there is no turning back. You will belong to the land, to the Forgotten Ones. You will never return to the life you once knew. Dmitri's heart pounded in his chest. He thought of his past, the endless years chasing myths, searching for truths buried beneath time. He had always been an outsider, a wanderer, never truly belonging anywhere. But here, standing among the wolves beneath the vast expanse of the night sky, he felt something he had never felt before.
Purpose.
I'm ready, he said, voice steady. The black wolf lifted its head, and from the distant horizon, a deep, guttural sound echoed through the mountains. A howl, long, haunting, powerful. One by one, the other wolves joined in, their voices merging into a chorus that shook the very earth. Above them, the sky shifted. The full moon, pale and cold only moments ago, darkened into a deep crimson. The blood moon had risen. The black wolf stepped closer. Kneel. Dmitri obeyed, lowering himself onto one knee in the snow. The ancient wolf's breath misted in the air as it spoke the words that would seal his fate. Under the gaze of the blood moon, do you swear to protect this land, its creatures, and the balance between man and beast? Dmitri clenched his fists. I swear. Do you vow to stand against those who seek to defile the sacred places, to challenge the darkness that creeps from the void? His pulse quickened. I vow. The wind howled through the trees, carrying unseen whispers. And do you accept the burden of the guardian, knowing it will bind your soul beyond death, that you will walk the forests even when flesh and bone have turned to dust? Dmitri hesitated for only a moment. Then, with unwavering certainty, he spoke. I accept. The ground trembled. A surge of raw energy pulsed through him, searing through his veins like wildfire. He gasped as his senses exploded. He could hear the heartbeat of the earth, feel the shifting of the wind, see every movement in the darkness with perfect clarity. The pack let out another howl, this time one of triumph. Dmitri Sokolov was no more. He had become something greater, something eternal. As the blood moon loomed above, its light bathing the land in crimson, Dmitri lifted his head. His eyes burned gold, the mark of the guardian seared into his very being. And deep in the forgotten corners of the world, where ancient forces slumbered, something stirred. The new guardian had risen, but so had something else.